You so much. I just hope I don't sound overly critical. I think one of the key challenges that civil society and analysts have observed is the lack of a budget law. So why a budget law is important is because it serves as a guide. Legislation essentially serves to order human behavior. Without laws, human societies would be arbitrary. But laws bring a semblance of sustainability, of order, of cohesion. So you have situations where budgets are brought to the National Assembly late, and the National Assembly is forced to scurry around and review and run through the process. And that's partly because there is no law mandating the executive to submit the budget at a particular time. There is no regulation that prescribes behavior that runs contrary to an orderly system. So you have budgets brought relatively late, giving the National Assembly very little time to properly oversight that budget. A second challenge I think that is really interesting and has come up within the recent years is the publication of implementation reports. Now, without this data, without this information, it would be next to impossible for civil society, for the academics, for the think tanks to properly assess where the government is. I'm just hearing, the report by your correspondent as to how far the capital budget has been implemented. And such information isn't available, where it's supposed to be. Fiscal Responsibility Act in Section 30 mandates the publication of budget implementation reports quarterly, and then a half-year report after 6 months. Unfortunately, there are no penalties, for breach of that provision. So even if it's not within the power of the Budget Office to determine, this information is not there. So what we have as of today, the last time I checked, I stand to be corrected, is the half-year 2024 budget implementation reports. So we are, 8 months, without information on how well the budget has been implemented. That's the second challenge. The third challenge, I think, and one which is, very, very intractable for some reason, is the issue of monitoring and evaluation. So for you to know that you've spent your money well, you need data on how well the monies have been spent. You need to assess how much value for money has been attained, by your spending process. I'm afraid that far too often this monitoring and evaluation is done in like an ad hoc manner, despite the fact that the Buhari administration proposed and actually came up with a very, very workable monitoring and evaluation policy, that was approved by the Federal Executive Council. It doesn't have legislative backing. So the government is basically free, to go about it the way it knows how. And that way may not provide enough information on value for money, on hitting targets. How do you know if maternal mortality has dropped? How do you know if the number of out-of-school children has reduced? How do you know if energy provision has increased, the incidence of persons with electricity available in their homes from the grid, questions like that. And without that M&E policy, mandatorily applied to the actions of government, it's very difficult for you to know if your budget is achieving its purposes. Lastly, before I round up, the issue of audits, I think that is one that is another intractable issue. Unfortunately, the system we operate doesn't allow for value for money audits and performance audits. What you get is a check, and a check is not very rigorous in terms of assuring that money proposed and money release has been spent. So, these are just a few of the problems.
Well, yeah, many thanks, Mr. Kwaga. These challenges you've mentioned have been with us, over the years. It's not just with this 2025 budget, But you see, to set a tone for this conversation, specifically on the 2025 budget, I'd like to hear your view, what you think about the budget itself. Some have said, well, this budget may just, the content, may just be if properly implemented, you already mentioned that that's a challenge, but well, if we can surmount implementation challenges, then it's likely going to take us further than where we're coming from. I want to hear your view about that. Do you agree with that line of thought, looking at the fact that in this budget we intend to borrow 9.22 trillion naira, which is higher than 7.83, which we borrowed last year? I mean, just speak about, your concerns in this budget.
So the conversation is really around optimism, cynicism, budgets are plans, essentially. And where you are unable to tie your plan to actionable, measurable results, you will consistently miss your targets. And it's less about how much or how well you spend money, and rather how impactful has the budget been on the lives of Nigerians. Before I go into addressing the 2025 budget, I'd like to preface my comments by saying there needs to be far better coordination between the federal government and the states. Yes, the president gets a lot of flack, people make fun of him on social media, but that same energy should be kept for the state governors, because we operate a federal system, and the Constitution stipulates very clearly the responsibilities of each level of government. There are there are public works projects, agriculture projects, education projects that local government should be handling. And, I hear people, in casual conversations say, oh, the president should have done. And I'm like, okay, that's not the president's job. That isn't even a governor's job. So there needs to be better coordination through there's a mechanism the government has, I think it's called the Joint Planning Board. Now, the Joint Planning Board used to meet, I think, every year under the Buhari administration. I'm not sure whether they've met under this new administration. But that essentially was a stock-taking exercise where all tiers of government, or at least the state governors and the federal government, would meet to discuss and plan and ensure that where the federal government is going, the states can cover the field that has been left behind. And that brings about coordination and cohesion and ensures that resources are spent well. So looking at the 2025 budget, I mean, it's ambitious, but I think that's what Nigeria needs. If you look at countries similar to Nigeria in terms of population, or countries with a far less, 1/3 of our population, they are spending twice, 3 times, what we spend in our budget. So the issue really isn't about we're spending too much. The problem has always been spending well and coordinating your spending. I think Kenya's budget, 2024 budget, was around $50 billion, if I'm not mistaken. And Nigeria's 2024 budget was not, I don't think it was shy of 30 billion, thereabouts, if I'm not mistaken. So there really needs to be more spending, actually. Even the usual suspects of high recurrent expenditure, we actually do need more teachers, we do need more doctors, we do need more policemen, and that would increase the recurrent wage bill. But again, those monies need to be channeled to the brick and mortar people who eke out the government's policies, the doctors, teachers, and policemen. For capital expenditure, I think this budget is also very ambitious. Again, we do need to spend more in terms of infrastructure, because why the economy isn't as productive as it should, barring soft infrastructure like access to justice, the road networks, the rail lines, energy provision, waste management and disposal, these are things that would overnight ensure that business is more productive, because when you're spending less on energy, when you're spending less on logistics, when you're spending less on waste management, when you can convey your goods from one point to another as cheap as possible, you have more income to furnish your business, to hire more employees and to expand. So yes, the budget is interesting. The parameters are kind of more interesting. I think we'll comment on that later. But I think in terms of raw numbers, the budget is where we should be. We should even do much more. But our spending needs to be far more efficient, far more effective, and far more transparent.
Okay.